Emilsson, and I'm one of the authors of the paper, The Interdependency of Data Governance and Open Government Data, Lessons from COVID-19. The piece was written together with colleagues from the OECD Digital Government and Data Unit, which lies within the Public Governance Directorate. We also received important feedback and insights from two experts in the open data field, which are Anya Calderon, Executive Director of the International Open Data Charter, and Mr. Paul Stone, which is lead of the Open Government Data and Information Program within the New Zealand government. Today we know that most national governments have transformed from analog to e-government. However, our team's mission at the OECD is to support governments in their transformation to digital government, which includes the adoption of a data-driven culture and establishing frameworks for data governance to facilitate the effective, coherent, and ethical use of data in the public sector. Over the past few months, government data related to the COVID-19 crisis have been collected, combined, shared, reused, analyzed, and questioned. It has been difficult not to be aware of the many insights and evidence these data have given us. At the same time, there are also many challenges which are increasingly being exposed. This includes data accuracy, data sharing, data privacy, data infrastructure and architecture, and more. One of the many data-related COVID-19 responses initiated by governments is the release of government data in open, free, and accessible formats to the public. This includes health data, procurement data, budgets, supplies, access to services, and much more. This paper attempts to shed new light on the importance of data governance for successful open data policies and how exactly open data policies are an integral part of data governance by drawing on the challenges that we've seen during the COVID-19 crisis. The OECD has several frameworks in place and data collected for making this analysis. It includes the OECD Framework for Data Governance in the Public Sector, which was presented in the OECD report, The Path to Becoming a Data-Driven Public Sector, launched in 2019. We also have the OECD Open Government Data Survey, which is launched every 2 years, which collecting data on national open data policies and initiatives directly from government officials. And this data is also used to calculate the OECD R Data Index. We then have the OECD Expert Group on Open Government Data, which is a high-level network of public officials that are responsible for open data policies in OECD countries, who meet and discuss the development of open data policies each year. And this year, in June 2020, the sixth expert group meeting was held and centered on the role of open data in fighting COVID-19. And thus, it provided important insights for this paper. The rest of this presentation will include some introductory thoughts on data governance, open data, and COVID-19 by Anya Calderon from the Open Data Charter. Next, it will be a presentation on the key insights from the paper by my OECD colleague and co-author, Lucia Chauvet. And we will then have some practical examples and lessons learned by Paul Stone from the New Zealand government. And finally, we'll have some concluding thoughts by my OECD colleague and also co-author, Felipe Gonzalez-Zapata.
COVID-19 has exposed fault lines in how we govern our world. It has forced us to rethink how we can provide equitable access and distribution of benefits while strengthening trust in institutions and saving lives. As uncertainty prevails, we are turning to data for answers. All over the world, data has been instrumental in helping model and flatten the curve. However, there is little consistency in how governments collect data, and at the same time, legitimate concerns have been raised about how this data is used, both now and in the future. As part of a united COVID-19 response, we at the Open Data Charter launched an international collaboration with the OECD and other partners to identify high-value open data in a pandemic. Since then, data stewards and practitioners have joined us in organizing virtual meetups to identify data needs of diverse communities around the world. This has served as a starting point to discuss gaps and take action, aiming for a more consistent approach to publishing quality and trustworthy data. From these discussions, we highlight 3 lessons that point to the increasing interdependence of data governance and open data policies. One, the impact of a lack of standardization on quantifying the actual scope of the pandemic. Inconsistent data vocabulary is affecting how different countries report and interpret data. To foster the international joined-up action needed to meet this global challenge, data has to mean the same thing across jurisdictions. Two, transparency and accountability are crucial for the public to trust decisions, which is why we have seen a strong demand for tracking how funds are mobilized, and that there is an equitable distribution to guarantee resources are reaching those who need it most. And finally, public health outbreaks are known to disproportionately impact minorities, migrants, and socially excluded communities. Sensibly sharing and opening up privacy-preserving data about vulnerable populations is crucial to mitigate the impact of this in future pandemics. We must put the hardest hit communities at the center of COVID-19 response while protecting against surveillance and profiling of different demographic groups and upholding their fundamental rights. These are all matters of governance, and they cannot be left as an afterthought. Now is the time to fundamentally rethink data governance models that are context-specific, where access to data is fairly distributed while mitigating risks and harms. Only then will our data infrastructures protect society as a whole, keep power in check, and build a new kind of table that furthers values of agency, accountability, and equity.
My name is Lucia Chauvet. I'm part of the Digital Government and Data Unit at the OECD, and I'm also one of the authors of this paper. Throughout the writing of this paper, we noticed that to respond to COVID-19, many governments have taken an open data approach, where data is freely available and can be reused, as opposed to a public sector information approach where factual information is shared with the public. This was made possible thanks to the maturity level of the data governance and OGD practices currently in place. Since most OECD countries have adopted key policy levers, such as formal requirements to release open data by default, this has highly facilitated countries to respond to the pandemic. As seen in this graph, 94% of OECD countries have formal requirements at their central federal level to release open data by default. And these formal requirements have enabled the release of state-funded science, emergency procurement, and expenditure data and other relevant data to ensure transparency and decision-making, as well as helping emergency response during the pandemic. Also, the formal embedding of diverse policy areas into national OGD policies are very helpful. In 2018, more than half OECD countries have included open budget as part of their national OGD policy, and with around 40 to 50% of them covered open science, natural risk management, and open contracting. This, together with the open data by default requirement, helps coordinating the release of data across sector and data holders. But even if governments have launched initiatives to release OGD as part of their COVID-19 response, we observed a lack of OGD policy implementation in terms of data infrastructure, standards, and interoperability. As seen in the graph, it is the biggest challenge with 19%. And this is linked to the insufficiency of metadata quality assessments, lack of standardized data collection, as well as recording methods. Followed by this, there is the identification of what data to prioritize for release, with 17%. Public servants need guidelines and skills to conduct such selection processes, while at the same time they are depending on data infrastructure like data catalogs, which enables them to overview what data are available versus what data should be collected or curated for release. A third challenge is coordination and collaboration with central health authorities, prime ministers' offices, and local governments in using OGD as part of COVID-19's response. This shows that even with existing policy levers, which should be promoting cross-government and multi-level coordination, implementation is still an issue. Paul Stone from New Zealand will then give us an example. Also, the lack of clear leadership, clear roles, and responsibilities are also reported as a challenge. This challenge is particularly critical because public trust can be questioned. Individuals often have high expectation concerning government's intervention, and more frequently when involving the use and release of data. As Cecilia mentioned, these data were collected from the OECD Open Government Data Survey, the OECD Expert Group on Open Government Data, and also from a call for evidence and through collaboration with the IODC, the International Open Data Charter. These challenges show the need to better integrate good data governance into OGD policies, while at the same time leverage high-quality OGD for better whole-of-government data governance.
Hello and greetings from New Zealand. My name is Paul Stone, and I've worked for a number of years in the Open Government Data Program, which in recent years has operated from Statistics New Zealand under the role of the Government Chief Data Steward, a role with the responsibility to lift data capability across the government system. So I've seen firsthand this interdependency between open data and data governance. A great illustration of this is through data inventories. One of the criticisms of the open data being released was that it was of poor quality and not being updated. So we developed a strategy to catalyse the building of data inventories across government. The reason we took this path was because good quality data will be released from well-managed data sources, and you can't manage what you don't know you have. A key outcome of the data inventories is the shift in agencies to think about data as an asset, and not just their asset, but the public's asset. Good governance not only ensures protection of assets, but also the maximum potential value is able to be generated from those assets. Data only generates value when it is used. That's why through the Open Data Program, we encouraged open by default, wherever appropriate, to give access to an unlimited pool of potential users to create value from it. Another catalyst for the data inventory project was that whenever we engaged with civil society about what data they wanted to access, they would turn around and ask, well, what data do you have? In this time of COVID-19, it has become evident that the needs of government agencies are much the same. While interviewing agencies about their data-related experiences during the pandemic so far, a number of agencies mentioned that it would be really helpful if there was an inventory of who had what in the way of data across government. New Zealand held a meetup in response to the global call for the OECD and Open Data Charter to run meetups with the data user community to understand their needs during the pandemic. From the meetup, it was evident that there was frustration with the lack of data published. There was good information published on the Central COVID website, but initially there was no downloadable data to take away and use. The good news though, in response to requests through the Open Data Program, the data has improved. And in particular, Stats New Zealand has been bold and put together a COVID-19 data portal, releasing not only data about the disease spread, but also a wide range of economic and social indicators on behalf of other agencies. The significance here is the important governance decision being made. Statistics organisations work hard to maintain a reputation of high trust and high quality data output. The decision was made that the situation called for timeliness over quality. So indicators have been released weekly or even daily without the usual rigor that would be applied. And this has been communicated alongside the data. This began just before the meetup and was raised with great appreciation. Some data was definitely better than no data in their eyes. And both the timeliness and the openness about the quality was appreciated. So I hope these stories from actual experiences help illustrate just how interwoven open data and data governance are. Thank you.
As my colleagues have discussed, the COVID-19 has demonstrated that government's capacities to communicate and address its consequences rely on the strategic release and use of data, good and timely open data. Many of the frictions and issues in accessing to or reusing this data can be explained by past decisions concerning overarching data governance frameworks. Although governments have grown more mature in terms of their formulation and adoption of OGD policies, challenges related to the lack of leadership, standards, data infrastructure, and coordinating mechanisms remain. As discussed in this presentation, this crisis evidences the need for measures to better link OGD with broader data-driven public sector strategies and initiatives, including the fundamental data governance elements needed for enhanced access to and sharing of data. For example, data leadership, privacy protection, information security, data infrastructure development, and interoperability standards. Hence, a more solid integration of OGD into data governance practices is required, as well as increasing the awareness for sound data governance for successful, scalable, and sustainable OGD policies. With an increasing adoption of open by default principles, data quality, opportunity, and openness cannot be treated as separate elements. In a data-driven public sector, OGD is a natural part of sound data governance. While data governance is a complex and multi-layered issue, and it should become an integral part of OGD policy development. My name is Felipe Gonzalez-Zapata from the OECD Digital Government and Data team, and I invite you to check our work on digital government, open data, and data-driven public sectors at oecd.org/gov/digital government. Thank you very much.